Hello and welcome to the Discovering Spirituality podcast, Episode 1, God the Creator. In this podcast, I will be sharing my thoughts on the writing God the Creator, taken from the channeled book The Light in Your Life is Spirit by George A. Thomson. Primitive man had a need to create gods, an entity to be revered or blamed according to its nominated purpose, or a figure to be exploited and feared. By creating a figure of authority and power, man regarded himself as lesser than these gods. Gods and demons were used as moral benchmarks to manipulate and modify and even to explain human behavior itself, effectively creating systems to control the group or society. In time, human understanding began to grow. The many gods became one. But this single god is still regarded as a figure of authority, as well as a benevolent creator, the giver of life. The subsequent development of religious texts focus on God's true word as a moral foundation to help the individual lead a more spiritual life, a life that is closer to God. But there is still conflict as man's perception of God still has him in a position of authority. Living by God's edict could be seen as a form of moral bondage and a denial of true freedom. This conflict of interests gives rise to man developing a love-hate relationship with his supposed creator. Through study and observation, there were those who developed a greater understanding of one's relationship to God, and understanding is the key part of this discovery process. As God is still regarded as an authority figure, it is easy for man to forego his personal responsibility, thus living in chaos instead of order. Order is unification and acceptance. The more primitive gods were held responsible for unexplained phenomenon, which is usually reflected using the four elements. Again, due to a lack of understanding, man sculpted the gods in human form, as well as being imbued with both positive and negative human qualities. The gods' history, along with their characteristics, were woven into elaborate narratives. They were given names, faces, emotions, kingdoms, siblings, parents, and abilities. The single God was regarded as the Father, a Father that guides, nurtures and protects, the giver of life, the Creator, a Father that also punishes and at times was to be feared. What are the motivations behind our creation? Why did God create man, the only creature on earth that has free will? If we are the result of God's creativity, one has to ask for what purpose? As man evolved through a process of understanding, we started to determine what God is not. This shift, if continued, will guide man to discover what God is. To care for life, to be sensitive and forgiving. To revere life is to revere God, for God is life. God the Creator. Question: why did God create man? For what purpose? Without free will, man would just be another creature. An animal with limited understanding, living by his primitive instincts and needs. Although every creature has a life force or soul, man has the essences of love, sensitivity, compassion, and understanding. If God is the creator, what exactly did he create? A highly complex being capable of discovery and exploration. If one compares man to the rest of God's creatures, we realize that man is an anomaly. We had similar paths of evolution like the other creatures, then at some point there was a divergence. While other creatures adapted wholly to their environment, man evolved on a different level. Man started to develop emotional intelligence. This created the individual, the self, an aware being capable of reasoning and complex thought. Animals are driven by instinct. They do not think, they react. They can, however, adapt biologically depending on their environment and the availability of food. If we look at the animal kingdom, it is incredibly savage despite its beauty. The killer-be-killed structure invariably creates a tragic, albeit brutal, harmony. God also created this. Did God create the dinosaurs? Or were they just the natural byproduct of evolution? They dominated Earth for millions of years before man evolved. So if God is the creator, what did he create? Simply speaking, life. God created life, but why? For billions of years, the earth and its inhabitants took form and evolved, but only one would reach the point where they could think beyond the primitive. God patiently waited over 5 billion years until the seed finally started to sprout. But this was not just primitive life. This was life that was self-aware, albeit in its infancy. But God has a problem. God does not know what God is, just like man. Both are on the path of self-discovery. I am reminded of the phrases, know thyself, as well as God made man in his own image. Here's a thought. Why is the human lifespan so short? One would think that in order to truly know thyself, having more time would be helpful. Does this suggest that man is capable of being fully realized within a single human lifetime? Is this the goal? Is this the purpose? What is life? What is thought, thinking? What is the purpose of life? To understand it? Life can be lived, it can be observed, and it can be experienced. How would life present itself if it was just observed? What would you see? There are a multitude of dynamic processes, all of which exist in harmony. It's like a song played with a billion instruments, coming together as one. If you could behold it even for a moment, I have no doubt that it would bring you to tears. To think is to find meaning, to discover truth, God's truth, the universal truth, to discover the meaning of life, to understand what life means, its value. The aware individual discovers themselves. The aware individual recognizes the value of truth. The aware individual sees everything for what it is. The aware individual is graceful. Man creates human representations of gods. God gives man free will. What is free will? God is love as a primer. To know love is to know God. What is love? It's probably fair to say that man's perception and understanding of God has not evolved that much from the early years of gods and goddesses. Even today, the single idea of God is still in its infancy. But despite the teachings that can be found all over the world, the link between God and evolving our state of being has still not been fully realized. God is love does not just act as a moral compass, it is the key to human evolution. By choosing to learn about love, we elevate our consciousness, change our society, change our behavior, which can lead to genetic changes. In short, it leads to our ascension. Our energy resonates differently and the bigger picture reveals itself. We are more than just flesh and bone. We, the essence of who we are soul. This goes back to the fact that human beings are capable of understanding. To other life forms in the universe, God may well have a different meaning based on their evolution. We are talking about more than just the worship of an imaginary being. What we're talking about is the infancy of man's evolution and how it has reached a sticking point. We are willingly holding on to our primitive savagery. The fact that man has developed technologically has done little to develop his emotional intelligence. It is probably fair to say that we are regressing at quite a fast pace. Even within the last 50 years, man has regressed significantly. If you're interested in reading the writing from this episode, you can download it from the link in the description below. If you liked the topic discussed in this video, please feel free to subscribe and hit the like button. Also, by hitting the notification button, you can stay up to date when a new podcast is uploaded. Thank you for listening.